Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. So my last video I put on was talking about my game time Gladiators, and one of the features I showed off was the crowd simulation where I have planes for all the crowds and it randomly takes pictures of them all. Quite a few people requested a tutorial for this, so I'm going to break it down in even more detail, a dedicated video to the crowd system in my game. It can be massively improved, you can do more to it, you can animate them flipbook, but I'm going to show you the way I've done it and the way I go about it if you did want to upgrade it. Let's get started. So here I am back in my Time Gladiators game. You'll notice it looks a little bit different, but I've actually been testing with something cool. So you'll see this person now will walk up there, they'll jetpack up there, and then they'll land on the roof, and they'll walk away. Just a little cool feature I'm working on. But ignoring that, back to the crowd system. So I've got 3 parts to this crowd system that make it so I can mass generate crowds like this, and it's extremely efficient. The first one I'll start with is my NPC. So this NPC is just a standard actor. That's it. It's not a character. It's not got collision. You can shoot it and nothing will happen. You'll also notice it's not facing the right direction because it should be facing the red arrow, otherwise it'll rotate wrong if I were to use narrative or something, but we'll get onto that another day. So the reason this character is special and not just a static mesh is it actually has a randomized function built into it. So it's a standard actor with a skeletal mesh that I've applied my NPC to it. It's also got an animation blueprint where it just, plays a random idle animation. That's it. You could also just come in and add an animation of talking just like that and it'll be completely fine. But I've set my anim class up to do it. You'll also notice it's randomizing every single time I change something, and that's because I've got my randomized script on my constructor as well. The reason I've done this, I can come in here and I want to place an NPC there, I want to place an NPC there, and they'll always be squished for some reason or random. So let's take a look at the randomized script now. So if I come into it, and you don't need the construction part by the way, you can get rid of that and just run it on event begin play if you want, but I've got it on there just for my sake. And you'll see I haven't got mine on event begin play, it's just a standalone function, but all it does is connect to my data table of random crowd. And inside here, because I'm using multiple packs in my case, I have a row per pack. I have the Sinti Polygon Pirates, Ancient Empire and Sci-Fi Worlds. If you've just got one pack, you don't need to bother with this. Just create a data table containing all your meshes and you'll be fine. So in my case, I've got the row name, and inside all it does is list all the meshes that is applicable and all of the materials. The reason I've split this out and not just put them in one massive one is the skeletons for these are also different. So for each Sinti pack you get, Pirates, Ancient Empire and Sci-Fi Worlds, they have completely different skeletons. So that's why I've split it up like that. And all this data table is for each one, materials and meshes, that's it. So when I come back into my randomized function, all it does is get all of the rows from that data table, pick a random one from the array, and then get that row from the data table. Super simple. So it comes in, it picks Ancient Empire, that's it. And it breaks it down, and it picks a random mesh, and it sets the skeletal mesh, and then it picks a random material and sets the material. So for a basic low poly pack like mine, this is more than enough. If you were using something like metahumans and wanted them to randomize, firstly, I would not do it on construction because every time you drag them, it'll randomize and they're very high poly. Secondly, you may have to build it out more in bulk to change their haircuts, their armor, their clothes, everything else like that. I have one which I did show in the previous video where I randomized the enemy, which is completely random. So it gets random details, which is the exact same way as the other one. It goes to the data table, but I use this for a few bits. And then it breaks down on the meshes, then it breaks down on the materials, just like the others, but it also breaks down on the helmets and hats, and then voice packs, and then, well, a name, then it adds the tags for the name, but you could just as easily do hats, beard, face, and you've just got to find the right variables to assign. It's a bit more difficult on metahumans, but it is doable. The other thing with metahumans is you will have to assign multiple materials. For all Sinti packs, Element 0, they all have one material. It's that simple. Whereas with metahumans, you have like 5 or 6 materials, so you'll have to also take care of that. But basically, that's how they randomize. So that's the first step that I've got, and you'll notice that all of these have changed now. So that's my basic crowd NPC. The next crowd NPC is this flat plane person here. And this, again, is just a standard actor. So I'll come and open this one up. It's got a static mesh of a plane in it, and at the time, I didn't equip anything to it, so it was just a grey plane, which is fine. You'll come on, and again, it's got a randomized function. It's marked as calling editor, and all that means is I can come come into my details, search for it, and you can see I've got a button in the editor, so I can call that event. I can just call it any way I want, just like that. Ooh, wow, that's really blurry, that one. I don't know why that one's so bad. Get a better one. There we go. So yeah, that's all it does. So if you put them around and you think, I don't want the space one next to whatever that one is, you can click randomize and you can fix it. Just little bits like that. And that one, again, is the same. It comes to a specific data table that handles images, and all it is one image for every single one. And then it gets a random one, and then we'll look at the material setting shortly. So that's the two types of NPCs I've got. I've got the real 3D ones, and then I've got the flat plane ones. The 3D ones are for up close. So if you stand here, you can tell that's a 3D character, which looks good. That one, you can't really tell because it's far away. But if I was to drag this one actually near the player down here, and you get up close, suddenly it starts to, it actually still looks pretty good, but suddenly it starts to break down. And as you come around it, you could make it face you, but it starts to break down a lot. Whereas the one up there looks fine. So that's why I've done it. So up close, they're 3D. Far away, they're, not 3D. Old PS2 games used to do the same technique, but they wouldn't have these close 3D ones. They just have higher quality images. But for me, in quickness, that's what I did. So that's the first part, the actual crowds. They're the two crowds. The next part is the actual spline crowd generator that I've created. So this is a custom blueprint I've created called the crowd spawner. And all it is a special spline that you can come on. I can delete crowds and I can spawn them at will. If I drag this out, we've got this spline here. I come and make any shape I want with this spline. And then as long as I come and click spawn crowd, it will spawn all the crowd there following the spline with some randomization, because otherwise they'd look too normal. So you can see up here, these crowds are very diverse. They're very split. Some people are close together, other people are far away. If they were every 20 meters like this four here, that gap, that gap, that gap, they look very specifically strategically placed. It loses the imagination. It loses the realism of it. Nobody's going to stand exactly that much away. We've all seen COVID videos from when it happened. Nobody wants to stand so far apart. Whereas these ones up here, where they're forwards, they're back, they're stood close, there's a gap, there's stood three close together, three more close together, two close together. It adds so much more to it. Something you'll never hear people go, oh, that's a very random crowd. But if you don't do it, people will point out and go, that looks wrong. It's Uncanny Valley, I think it's called, where you never hear good things about it done well, but if it's done bad, you'll hear about it. And then with this crowd system, I can just also click delete as well. And I can choose which crowd I'm generating. So crowd NPC is these 3D ones, but I can easily come in and select the image variety, and that allows me to spawn a lot more, a lot quicker. And there we go. And they're all facing the right direction. Don't have the scale problem with those. Don't know why I do with the other ones, but because they're images, we can also quadruple, times a lot more of them, and it will still work. So there's my mass crowd look, and they'll all stand there, and no collisions are going on because they've got collisions turned off on the static mesh. So yeah, it works really, really well, really, really efficient. But let's delete that and let's go and have a look at it then. So the crowd spawner here is built up of a random function that I created. So the spawned actors array is the actors that is spawned in the world. Technically, it doesn't need to be instance available, but for debugging, I wanted it visible. And that basically is the little array here to show you how many it's spawned. If I click spawn, you'll see it says I've got 21. Click delete, it goes away. That's pretty much it. And then all it does, if I click delete, is loop over them, destroy, 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 clear the array. That's it. The next function I've got, again, is another one you can click call in editor, is spawn crowd. This is what actually spawns the crowd. So the first thing I've got is all of my crowd are static. You won't see them rotate if you walk over here or if you walk over here. Every single one will be looking directly into the stadium, which is the way I wanted it for performance. If you want yours to slightly rotate, you'll have to get a bit more customizable with it. But for my static crowds, I've just added a target point down here. So if you just search for target, it's just a lightweight actor. And all I did was add a tag of it to look at point, and then every single crowd will look at this point over here. If I was to move this over here and click randomize on, say, this one, every single crowd will suddenly rotate. As you can see, this one here, I don't know why he's not, these ones are rotated to look over at this target point over here. So that's all that does. It controls the rotation of all of them. So I don't have to calculate it or hard code it. It gives me an easy way to change it. So all it does is get that, and then it remembers it down here for later. Then it comes in, and just in case you forgot to click delete, it deletes all the crowd when you click spawn as well. Then the amount to spawn is just an integer I've set up. So this is what I was changing earlier to say how many characters do you want to spawn. You don't want to spawn an infinite amount, you'll get crashes. So in my game, you set how much you want to spawn. It's single for loops over it, not a for each loop, because we're doing it by integer. So 4 loops over it. Then the first thing it does is we need to get the length of the spline. So in here, I've added the spline here, and it will get the distance between the first point and the very last point in Unreal meters or whatever it is. I think one of mine, I like round this part all the way around to there, was like 4,000. So you can imagine the bigger ones over here will be like 8,000 or something. And that's how it divides up where to put them. So it gets the length of that by going spline, get spline length, and then it divides that by the amount to spawn. So what this division does is it gets us the segments of that spline. So if you have a spline that's 4,000, so it's 4,000 unreal meters long, and you wanted to spawn 20 characters, you divide it by 20 and it says every 200 you will put a character. And that's how we know all the segments of it. So if I were to do 200 times 20, it should give us 4,000 and it will cover the entire spline. So that's why we do that logic. And then with this, we basically take the index, so it starts at 0, then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to your amount to spawn, in my case 20. So it goes 0 to 19, because 0 counts as 1, and then it multiplies our value by that. The reason we do this is if we come back to our calculator, if we have 4,000 divided by 20 every 200 meters, so the first time it does it, it'll do 0 times 200, so it'll be 0, so it'll put it right at the start of the spline. After that, it will come in and say 1 times 200, so 200, so it'll move it 200 meters across the spline. Then if we come in and say do 2 times 200, it'll now move it 400 meters, then 600 meters, 800 meters, 1,000, and it'll keep doing it until you've hit all 20. And in theory, when you get to the end, you do 19 times 200, you will get 3,800, and then finally 20 times 200 will get you your 4,000. So that's how it increments it up nice and easily. After this is where we need to actually get that segment across the line. So we've got our length of our spline, we know which increment or segment we want to spawn the character, so we go our spline and we do get location at distance along spline. It's a mouthful, I know, but all it basically says is tell it the float distance, so 200 meters, 400 meters, 1,000 meters along the spline, and it will get you a vector position of it. I've set my coordinate space to world, so it tells me in the vast world where it needs to spawn. If it's set to local space, this will be 0, 0, 0 instead of wherever my 0, 0, 0 point is in the world. Making it a bit tough to spawn the actors. It's doable, but just set it to world space and it'll tell you the exact coordinate of this guy here, for example. And now that's given us a location for where we want to spawn the actor. If you did want them in sequence in uniformity, then you can just take this and plug it into your spawn actor. However, I wanted my little variation adding into it where they change distance, they rotate at the correct point. So starting with the location, so all I do is I take this vector here and I just add a value to it like so, and then the value I'm adding to it is a float, and I'm just doing between minus 100 and 100. So if you told them spawn at 400, minus 100 will be they will move across to 300, or plus 100 they'll bump up to 500, and it's anywhere in there they'll shift along. And the reason I'm putting it onto the vector is that they're shifting along all 3 axes. So they may be higher on the Z, they may be higher further back on the Y, or across to the X axis, which adds the randomness. You'll then later see that I come across, I break from this, and I just use the X and Y anyway. I ignore the Z axis because my splines dictate the Z axis. So this spline here is set so it's at the correct level around here, so all of these people sit exactly where they need to on there. You'll see on this one, I haven't put it on the floor properly. It needs to be moved down more, like that. And if it was on the floor properly, these chaps won't be floating, but they are, and yeah. So I could move that down and regenerate them. And then all I do is just grab the Z axis from here and plug it in. So that's the location sorted. How do we do the rotation so they look directly down? Now we skip the X and Y rotation, because if we were to do that, if we were to look at this guy up here, the X rotation is around here. The X rotation is the red one. So if I were to rotate on the X, it'd look down at the character like that. And we don't want him facing down like that, because that just looks weird, frankly. So we ignore the X axis, and we do the same for Y axis, because we don't want him looking at you like side to side. That just looks weird as well. All we need is the Z axis to follow the correct point like so. So what we do is we ignore the X and Y and just plug straight into the Z from there. To get the location you need to look at, drag off your starting location, so in my case where they're spawning, find the lookout rotation, and then just plug in the location of your other one, and Unreal will take care of the rest for you. It's fantastic, this function. So my target is actually my lookout point here, so get the lookout point, get the actor location, plug in to find location. That's it. I then break on the vector and I just use the Z axis like so. I do also randomize the scale. It's too little, you can't see it, but if you look very carefully, some of these characters are actually a little bit taller than the others. So like them two, he's actually a little bit taller than her, but not by much. So I could have adjusted those values, but it was to take into account that I was supposed to have aliens in here, but I never actually got around to adding the aliens in. So like, yeah, they're all different sizes, but only minorly. And after that, I choose which class I want to spawn. So is this going to be my actor, my crowd NPC, or my crowd NPC image? I've just set it to a class of actor and I spawn it in. Then finally I add it to the spawn actors. And that's it. So it comes in, spawn crowd, gets the look at point just once, then deletes the crowd, loops over all 20, comes in, gets the point for that first one where it needs to be on the spline, gets the actual location, randomizes it up a little bit, spawns the actor, adds it to the class. Then it comes back to the beginning of the loop, gets the next index, gets their position along the spine, location, randomize, spawn. That's it. That's all the crowd spawning system does. And that's how I've managed to achieve such big ones like here. So don't get me wrong, it is a bit tedious to do at first. So if I were to come in and drop my crowd spawner in here, make sure it's touching the floor, otherwise they won't line up properly. That'll do. And then all you have to do is just click the spline point that you want to do. So you can see I can click the white point. I'm just going to drag it out to where I want it to go. You'll see this one's extended further than it is. This is the rotational point. So if I were to grab this and rotate it, you'll see it curves the arrow, which is great if you want to do around corners and stuff. For mine, I've just done jaggedly sharp edges, so you can see that there's no rotation points. I just let it take care of itself. But I was in a rush. You can really fine tune it if you want. So I'll click that dot. You can see all I did was come into the top mode. I grab the arrow, I drag it out a little bit more. Then I move my screen across. I hold the Alt key to clone and I drag it again. And then I drag it again, holding the Alt key. You'll see sometimes it glitches up and does that. It is slightly annoying. But then you pull it across and you just basically build a spline to drop where you want the NPCs to go. So I tend to just like cut across it like so. I don't mind so much because these ones are far away. So if they're touching the seats in front or something, you won't notice unless it's ridiculously bad. Like most people in real life would follow the curve almost. I don't need them to, so I just kept building it up and around. And then eventually you will get to a point where you reach the end of your location, like so. And now you can actually see it quite well there. So there, if I'm above my plane, you can see where I've dragged the arrow around. It only took up like a minute or so. I just got bored of doing it after I did all of these. And then all you can do is come back to here, set everything up. So you want, in this case, I want the image. And how many do I want to spawn? I can't honestly remember how many I spawn up here. I spawn 100. That's quite a lot, but I'm going to spawn 100 then. And I click spawn. Boom. There we go. We now have that row filled up. So you can tell that row here is empty. That's what it looks like now. Completely filled in, fits in, looks like a crowd. Everyone's sat there. Like I say, sometimes it gets weird. Like, why is he stood behind him? That's just weird. And then around here, everyone's facing the target point, which is in the middle of the thing there. And you can see everyone looks good. Like I said, sometimes you will get issues like this, where them two have somehow managed to randomize to the point where they're basically touching each other. That wouldn't happen, but down here, in the middle of the battle, you can't tell. They could just be holding hands or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's really, really good to do and really, really quick. So the final part I'm going to show to really elaborate on this system is how I randomized these meshes properly. Because I didn't go through and take a picture of every single one of these, which I believe is here. I didn't take, 400 pictures or whatever. It would have took too long. I know I jokingly said in the last video, I spent more time than I should have made this crowd generation system. In hindsight, if I had to take this many pictures with this many random combinations, I would have been in there for years. And we don't want that at all. So how did I take the pictures in the best way to generate this on the fly? Now, the way I've done it is a very hacky way, but it works. That's the benefit of it. You wouldn't deploy this in a live game, as in the bit that takes the images. The crowds themselves, yeah, deploy them in a game, they're completely fine. So the way I did it is I just used one NPC, just a single one. So if I grab this guy and drop him here and rotate him so he faces the correct way, and then I actually borrowed something from the new narrative tool, Inventory, and that had an equipment capture where you can load the inventory and see your character's equipment. And that's what sparked it off for me. When I saw these characters, I was like, how am I going to take all these pictures? And I remembered that already does it. So I logged onto it, downloaded the latest version, and previewed how it did it. So the way it does it is it's got this tool here called the equipment capture. If I drag this in, all it is a blueprint that has a camera. And it's got some other things which we'll look at in a minute, but I've modified mine ever so slightly. And all I do is I line this up like so, pointing where I want it to point to, and then I make sure it's looking okay. I set the selected pawn. So for me, I want to take a picture of her, and then I set the images how many I want. So I'm say, let's go and create 400 images kind of thing. It takes time, don't get me wrong, but it does work. So let's go and look at how the equipment capture actually works. So it's built up of a bunch of different things, but the main parts are the camera, which is a spring arm pointing in the right way, and a scene capture, which is the render target. So the spring arm is basically just a camera that you can move up and down, wibble, wibble, wibble. And all I've done is I've pointed it to roughly where the middle of my mesh will be. So I can place the blueprint down here at root. So you can see when I select it, I get the root of it here, but the actual camera points to the middle of the NPC, meaning the pictures it takes should be even enough. And then the scene capture is basically a render target that it writes to. So if I come down and find my render target here, so all this is a render target, so you can right click and just search for render target. There we go. And if you open it up, it's just a blank canvas at the moment. moment because it's not been written to yet. But all this means is this camera is going to write whatever it sees to the render texture. So now you can see the process is starting to slowly form, that the camera takes a picture, writes to the render target, and we have at least a remembered image. But then how do we start saving it all? So what I've done is I've heavily modified what it originally did. So it comes in and just calls start process. I don't know why I didn't just do that, but never mind. And then all start process does, breaking it down, is it gets how many images are remaining. So I said spawn 400 images. So if it equals 0, it'll stop doing what it needs to. Whereas if it equals false, meaning it's got more than one image to do, then it comes on and starts going down. So the first thing it does is get the selected pawn that we've picked. So it comes to this NPC and calls randomize. So just give him a little shake. There we go. So it randomizes them. And then it takes off the image. I don't know why it's in this order. Just put it any order, it'll work. It takes off the image, which makes this flag up later. Then it calls initialize on the camera here. So this is what Narrative already did that I managed to nicely borrow. It checks if the selected pawn is valid. Technically, we don't need this. For Narratives, it was a bug fix. For this, I've heavily modified it. And then it uses this show only actor components. So you pass in the render target, and then you pass in the pawn that you want it to do. And then it'll loop through and only show actor components. So it'll get rid of everything else. Any collisions that are visible, splines, line traces, anything else, it will temporarily hide them away. And then it comes over and it sets the lighting channel to be channel 1. This is a extra lighting channel that Unreal's not technically using on mine at the moment. And you'll see that's why all my characters are dark, because they've not been affected by lighting. They're just static. But when they're placed in the world, the lighting affects them properly. So if I had a bright light coming from this direction, this character here would have light on the right side of his face, and the left side will be ever so slightly darker. Mine is just a uniformly lit thing, so you don't see it as much. But for example, this guy here has got a darker texture than this guy over here because he's affected by the lighting. That's what the lighting channels are for. For mine, you don't massively notice it, but it is there. And that's pretty much all it does. It just loops over all of the primitive components, which are your static mesh, your skeletal mesh, stuff like that, and sets the lighting channels. So that's what initialize does when it first gets it. Technically, you only really need to do this once. I don't know why I've made it randomize it, do it over and over and over again here, but it doesn't matter. Then I delay it, and you might be thinking, why am I delaying it? And the reason is the scene capture needs time to wait to update itself. So when I call randomize and then I call initialize here, where I do everything I need for the lighting channels, that needs to wait so the render capture can take the screenshot and then remember it. I was finding that if I didn't do it, then the randomizer was running so quick that half the time the camera wouldn't pick anything up, other half the times it'd pick up 5 of the same NPC before it refreshes. So that delay gives it just enough time to take the picture. I tried 0.1, but I kept running into issues, so 0.2 is fast enough. If my computer was lagging, then I'd have to increase it. But if you imagine this is running, and then for every single one, it's got to wait 1 second times 400, you're going to be waiting a long time. 0.2, you're waiting a lot less time. And then finally, the one thing that took me the absolute longest to figure out was which bloody node to use here, but this is the one that I've settled on, and it works. So as it says, it is in the editor only. If you build your game, this won't work, because you can't write files to the game when it's published. So this only works in the editor, which is fine for me. And all I do is I get the scene capture, I get the target texture, which is the render target, and then I use the render target create static texture editor only. A long word. Basically, I get the render target, create a static texture only in the editor. That's it. So the name here is where I want to save it. So in my case, let's do crowd images 2. So it'll create a new folder for me here. It's from content. I didn't know that at the time, which is why it's randomly here, but that's fine. And then texture is basically whatever you want it to be called. So I could come and call it crowd NPC, and Unreal will deal with handling the numbers on the end for you. The compression settings, you have to pick this one. If you don't, you either get lighting issues, it'll complain at you. I don't know why. Some others might work, but from the ones I picked, that's the one you want. You definitely don't want any of the RGB ones. Yeah, you definitely don't want this alpha one here. If you pick one like this, where it says no RGB, you'll just get a cutout of the character. You won't see the actual character. If you pick one of the other ones, such as HDR, then it won't. Then it will also keep the background and the character in one go, and then the image won't work properly. You need to make sure that when you untick alpha or tick alpha, you have a cutout of the character, and then when we make our material later, it will cut them out properly, and that's what we want. And then after that, I just call start process again, where it comes back to the beginning. So I've got 400 images. Check if I've got an image to do. I do. Randomize the NPC, take it down, so I have 399 now. Initialize the scene, wait a little bit, take the screenshot, start the process again, comes back, 399, keep going, keep going, keep going. 400 times later, do I have any images? No, cancel. And that's it. That's all I do, ladies and gentlemen. So if I were to come into the game now, you can see I don't have a folder for my crowd images 2, and then as soon soon as I click play, because this is set to run on begin play load, then it will start taking the images. So if I load this up here and dock it, yeah, about there, you will see it will lag the game badly. It will lag so badly. I don't even know if the recording is going to pick it up, but it will lag. That's fine. Just delete your equipment capture once you're done. So you can see the game is now lagging horrifically. But I have crowd images too, and you can see it is going down and generating all sorts of characters. You see, this is not even me lagging, but you can see click, 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 and this is going to go on 400 times. So I'm going to be back in a minute when this finishes. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's done. But you can see it has successfully took the images. So now I can stop this, and then I can delete the equipment capture out, because we don't want that running, and then I can also delete this NPC. But you will see in the content browser, we now have 400 new images for the characters. I come in, untip the alpha, there's the space guy. Perfect. So now how do I randomize this onto these? Well, I showed you the data table earlier, which is fine, but dragging 400 images into a data table is not something I really want to do. So I'm going to show you how I bulk managed to make it work. So if I come and pick the right data table that I get all the data from here, so in here we have all 400 images from my old pack. So what I'm going to do is just make sure I add a crowd NPC with the number on it, because Unreal sometimes does it funkily. So you can see here, it doesn't just add crowd NPC 1 at the end, it does it twice for some reason. Same with the other ones, it doesn't matter. But make sure you add an empty row so when we export it, we've got it. Then I'm going to come back to my content browser here. I'm going to right click my data table, export as CSV. I'll just pick it right here, that's fine. And then if you come and open this CSV up in something like Microsoft Excel, LibreOffice Calc, anything like that, I've opened it in LibreOffice. Make sure it's separated by a comma and click OK. This will open up the data table that Unreal has with everything in it. So you can see all my old textures and my new ones. So we need to actually calculate this to figure out all of our different new ones. So what I'm going to do is just come here and type number 1, because I know it starts at number 1. You can check this by going to Unreal, go into your folder, look at the first one, which is number 1, and scroll all the way down and look at the last one, 399 for me. So I'm going to come to 1 here, drag all the way down, and we need to go to 399. So you can see the little ticker is going up, and there we go, we've hit 399. So now I can click at the bottom, hold Control, press up arrow key to jump back up, and now we need to use a formula to generate this here. So you can see script/engine dot, so we don't need to change that. Texture 2D game, the path of it, which is why we've put the placeholder in there so we know what the path is. Then the name of the image dot the name of the image again. I don't know why. Unfortunately, if you just drag this down, it doesn't increase it, so that's why we need to write the formula. I'm just going to come in here and copy this. I'll press the equals key, I'll put a speech mark, I'll paste it, and I'll press the speech mark again. If you press enter, we now have this string as a formula. So how do we make it use this down here? I'm going to double click inside of it, and every number I need to replace, I'm going to get rid of it. I'm going to put 2 speech marks. I'm going to go back 1 inside of it. I'm going to put 2 ampersands. Then I'm going to go back inside of it and click the row I want. I'll paste the formula in the description so you can easily copy and paste it. And then you can see that's the first one done. So I'll come to the second number 1. I'll get rid of it. 2 speech marks, left arrow key, 2 ampersands, left arrow key, and click the row you want. So for me, C200, press enter. And now you can see it says crowd NPC2, NPC2. Double click this dot, boom. There's all of our crowd NPCs generated all the way to 399. Perfect. So now how do we generate the row numbers? Because I don't think Unreal does that for us. That's dead easy as well. We'll just use another formula. So equals speech mark. I'll do new row, and I'll call it 2 because I've got a whole nother batch. And I'll do underscore, and then we need to get this number. So I'll do speech mark ampersand, click the number, and that's it, and just click the number. Press enter. New row 2, double click, new row all the way down to 399, just like that. Perfect. The final thing is we need to just make sure that these aren't set as formulas anymore. We need to actually make sure they're saved and written to the file. So I'm going to come up, select all my rows, copy, right click, paste special text, and you'll see now it's no longer a formula, meaning I can come down here, Control Shift down, and just delete all of these extra rows off. We don't need that column. Alternatively, right click C and choose delete columns. Now we can save. So let's add this back into Unreal. So come back into your data table details, delete off any existing source file you've got, click the 3 dots, find your source file and import it, and finally click reimport. It may take some time depending on your computer and how well it is, but now if we scroll down, you can see we have every single NPC. So we now have nearly 600 varied screenshots of NPCs to use in the game, meaning all of these NPCs up here can now be randomized. So if I come select all my crowd images, I search for my crowd image, and I'll just do Control A to select them all. Click randomize. It may take some time, but every single plane will refresh to use the new ones and the old ones. And there we are, just that quick. You can see we've got some Tron looking ones. We've got all the different ones here, but we've basically randomized over 800 of them. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? So every single one has been randomized. We can even just go and click randomize again. Why not? Bang, done. So are any of these actually using the new one? So the final thing is, when we assign the material to these, we do it a little bit differently. So when we come to the equipment, when we come to the crowd spawner, we spawn the correct class, which is fine. But this one here, for the image, randomizes over all the images, picks a random one. That's fine. But it doesn't just change the mesh like we're used to. It actually gets the current material, and the material of this is one we'll look at in a minute, called material instance crowd, and it needs to be a material instance, and it creates a new dynamic material instance. And all this means is for each time you create a material instance on all of these, it creates a new material instance in Unreal's memory. We're just telling it to do that for this each NPC. So if I come to my static mesh, you see material instance dynamic 0. If I click view, I don't have that. It's in memory basically. It's very lightweight, and it's, you know, you'll never have a problem with it. I've got well on, you know, nearly 2,000 actors now, and it's very, very efficient, so it's fine. So it creates a new one of them, and then what we do from here is we now set the texture parameter value now that we have the instance, and the value we're passing it is the image. So what is this texture parameter value? So let's go and have a look at the actual material then. If I click browse on this, we have this material instance here, which is just a material I've generated here, and all it does is have a global texture parameter value here. So I can change at runtime what it has, and that's all our image thing here is doing. It's changing the parameter name image to whatever it needs to be. So let's have a look at the source image. So the source image is this M crowd here. So all it is an image that I've dragged into here, like so, and then I've right clicked it and choose convert to parameter, and that's made it into this, so one that I can change. And then all I do is I take the RGB and I multiply it by 3, that just to make sure that we've got the correct color, it doesn't look off or anything like that, desaturated. I paste it into base color, and then from the alpha of this I minus X from it, which basically clips out the alpha, and then paste it into opacity. The type of this is translucent surface default lit, and I don't think you need anything else from there. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the full round trip of the crowd system. Quite long-winded, I know, but saves absolutely loads of time, and it's really, really efficient. You saw how quickly I could select all of these crowds and click randomize. You don't get super random crowds, nearly 2,000 NPCs, randomizing this quickly on the fly, which is perfect. You wouldn't run this at runtime. There's no point doing that. Maybe on event begin play at a push, but you wouldn't do it during the game round all the time. Like if you came to the arena and each crowd randomized, fine. Maybe randomize their position a tiny bit so it's a bit different. Yeah. That's one of the issues I said about. You run into little issues like this, but down here you can't even see if that's a person or not. You can see the top of it, but you're not going to point it out. And that's it. So you've got the crowd spawning spline, you've got the 3D NPC, you've got the plane NPC, you've got the material capture, and everything else you want. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is my tutorial. If you wanted these to be a flipbook, what you could do is just change your equipment capture. Instead of calling start process, you simply delay by however many frames you want the flipbook to work. So say if you wanted the flipbooks to work at 15 frames per second, because you don't want it to be super, super heavy, because you've got loads of them, then you could probably just calculate how often it needs to do it. So 60 seconds. So there's 1,000 milliseconds. So 1 second. So in 1 second, we need to generate 15 images. So if we do 1 divided by 15, we get that. That's our delay counter. So if I was to paste that in there, and then in theory, I've not tested it, now make that loop back around to the render target, keep an index of how often it needs to take it. It will come, it will take an image, wait 15th for the frame, take another image, 15th for a frame, image, and keep taking the images. That'll give the actor plenty of time to animate. So for example, say if they're waving or chanting, every 15th of a second, it will go pick, and take loads of pictures. That'll spit you out loads of images. Then it's just a case of finding a way to convert it to a flipbook. I don't know how to do that. I think you can do that. Create tile set from the image. I'm not sure. You could organize them into folders. You might be able to find a way to automate it. But yes, and then you could apply the flip charts to it. That'd make them roughly animate. It's not something I've looked into yet. But yeah, that's the theory behind that. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. That is the crowd system. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time.